Arc-tempered monsters are nothing new to this series. My opinion on the AT system has always been a little rocky, as I've never been sure as to whether or not it's the correct solution to achieving difficult content. Earlier this week, AT Rey Dau finally found its way to Worlds as the first of what we assume to be many of its kind. But does this fight give me hope for what's to come, or does it leave me concerned with the system we're stuck with for the rest of the base game? Worlds has had many players worried in multiple areas, with difficulty being one of the more prominent. I don't mean to beat a dead horse. Many of you will know I personally found myself very bored with these debates, as for the most part both sides are just shouting at brick walls with no intent of an actual conversation. However, no matter which side you take in that argument, the objective of AT Rey Dau is specifically to act as challenging content, so it's definitely worth discussing. If you didn't know, I'll also be talking about Worlds as a whole with Nova Bushido this Sunday at 7 PM BST, or if you're watching this video today, it will be tomorrow around this same time. The stream will be linked in the description below for you to add notifications as to when we go live. We'll be discussing difficulty, performance, mechanics, title updates and much more, so make sure to slide through. But anyway, first things first, we need to understand how AT monsters work in Worlds. And yeah, it's essentially one-to-one what it was in World. But let's look at the obvious changes. This version of Rey has an extra move, which is its lift-off blast, additional follow-up AoEs that are created even outside of its home turf, and lengthier combos which result in less free openings. All of these factors contribute to a much more difficult fight than its regular counterpart, or so I thought. As a longsword player, everything I just mentioned creates a bunch of challenges for my weapon. Using the wrong counter or using it in the wrong direction and you end up right on top of the AoE blast. If you get caught in a vulnerable position and miss your counter, you get hard punished. Helm breakers also become much more risky with this new Rey Dau, because it's in the air much more than it usually is, so they're harder to land. And if you use your helm breaker while he's grounded, yeah sure you can get yourself in the air to avoid any initial attacks, but there's a decent chance you're going to land on top of the follow-up blast. Timing becomes an even more important aspect to the weapon in this fight. And naturally, with every monster in World, Rise and Wilds, after a bit more learning you can absolutely counter your way through the whole fight, but the skill level and practice required to do so on the other hand is demanding of the player. But then we have shields. I highly doubt anyone will disagree with me when I say shields are very strong in Worlds. In my opinion, a little too strong. The irony here is of course that this is how everyone has felt about longsword for a while with our counters, but now the tables have turned, I understand where those comments come from. So long as you are somewhat facing Rey Dau and holding your shield button, he just can't kill you. You can tank every single attack in his arsenal, block through all follow-up blasts with next to zero consequence, and yeah, it's pretty much a get out of jail free card. In general, I feel shields need a slight nerf as a whole, at least on some weapons like sword and shield, but overall I am okay with them being the stronger defensive option. After all, that simply makes sense. With that being said, AT Rey Dau should without doubt, at the very least, have one unblockable attack. I've seen a decent amount of people state they feel the fight is too easy, and if you're a shield user I can absolutely agree with you. But just to clarify so there's no miscommunication, here's my overall opinion in this specific area. Monster Hunter is a game in which some weapons are stronger matchups against certain monsters. Shield being a strong matchup against AT Rey Dau is completely fine. However, I have the slight concern that other arc-tempered may suffer from this same problem, in which everything can be blocked without a trade-off. If this does happen, players won't be happy. And again, I do believe an increase in shield's power to be a very positive thing for the game. But do you honestly think Greatsword should be able to block Rey Dau's Death Blast? Maybe not. Longsword, at least from 5th gen onwards, will always be able to counter every single attack in the game with enough practice. I do understand that, but practice is the key word. Holding down a block button, anyone can do that. Maybe a solution could even be that perfect gods will always get you out of jail for free, in a very similar way to how longsword counters work. However, if you miss the timing and only use a regular block, maybe you should take more of a hit to your HP and stamina, or in the instance of some attacks, you should just take the damage. Now more than ever, I feel weapons are closer to each other in terms of power than ever before. Well, maybe not hammer, but maybe from here Capcom can look at incrementally tweaking things from an equal foundation. But moving on, a more obscure detail which you likely notice but not thought about directly is his wound resistance. Getting a wound to appear takes much more effort, which is a huge positive for the fight. One factor players cite for an ease in difficulty is the wound spamming, causing monsters to be permanently crowd controlled. You can use these for free knockdowns, interrupting big attacks, so on and so forth. The simple act of scaling down wound generation makes the fight feel so much more like the traditional my turn, your turn type of combat. And to be honest, after experiencing it in this way, I do sort of wish all monsters had this type of wound resistance, or at the very least, an increase in it. Naturally, as you progress further into the fight, you'll see more wounds appearing, which makes sense as your hits start stacking up. This means in the latter half of the fight, the wound resistance becomes less prominent. However, the mechanic would also become completely void if they never spawned. Then again, for what is intended to be an extra challenging hunt, maybe it would be a fun gimmick if AT monsters were completely immune to wounds. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. But what does this fight mean for the future of Wilds? At the very least, we can expect the remaining 3 Apexes to get an AT fight in future updates. It then wouldn't surprise me if we get AT Arkveld or Zolshir as a bonus towards the end of base game. For the average player, I sincerely believe these fights will provide a huge challenge. After all, and this may be anecdotal, but I've personally witnessed hunts for Rey go over 40 minutes. And that's if they didn't triple cart before reaching that point. You can then assume a below average player may never beat these challenges, which is how the game should be in my opinion. You cannot always tailor the game to be accessible for everyone. At some point you need to give your top 10% of players something to scratch the itch, whether that be a Fatalis in Iceborne or Primordial Malzeno in Rise. In my personal opinion, I don't think AT Rey is difficult enough to please this top 10%. It is a step in the right direction, but it's not quite there yet. Speaking personally, after 4 hunts, I got my time down to 10 minutes 27 seconds without capturing and without carting. Base game World Arc Tempered Monsters didn't feel too hard either though. Having gone back in the Return to World campaign last year, I went through all AT fights and didn't find myself struggling too much. But that is also with passive Iceborne changes and balances active in the background, so it wasn't the true base game experience. Comparatively, I would say this fight is close in challenge to Worlds, albeit with slightly less HP. But even if it did win out in difficulty, I would still like to see it go an extra step beyond to really solidify itself as a challenging piece of content. While the main bulk of difficulty does tend to lie in expansions, I don't think that excuses base game from completely lacking it. And again, those words are coming from a player who would say, I'm just about above average, albeit maybe a bit washed up. But that also does speak volume. I haven't really been playing Wilds too much within the past month or so. From having a bit of burnout to a bunch of other games coming out recently, I've had different priorities. And so the fact that I can go from maybe 10 hours played in Title Update 1 to within 4 hunts getting a almost sub 10 minute time on this fight, maybe it's a bit of a red flag, I'm not sure. And by the way, all of this is not to say that I'm not happy with how Rey turned out. Despite what I just said, I think this is my favourite fight from any base game in Monster Hunter history. Regular Rey Dau was my favourite fight in Wilds prior to this launch, so of course I'm going to have biasy towards it. But yeah, it's great. I have also personally seen sentiment online that potentially, what if this is what base Rey Dau should have been, and then an AT Rey Dau would be something even crazier. And maybe in an alternate timeline this was the case, but of course we know the current cycle of how Monster Hunter operates. We start off in the shallow waters to ease new players in. We can slightly increase challenge to kind of grow their tolerance moving forward. And when expansion comes, that's when Capcom can really cook on giving the top 10% of players that difficulty I was talking about earlier. Whether or not you think that's a right or wrong way to go about things, that is just what happens. That is also going to be a talking point on tomorrow's stream with Nova Bushido. Again, I'd love to see you all in that live stream. We'll be talking about things in a lot more depth, and me and Nova, while we have similar perspective on the game, we do have some disagreements in areas. We'll be taking comments from chat and using your input and feedback to help guide the conversation as well. So if you feel particularly strong about Wilds in any capacity, I'd really like to see you there. Thanks for watching.